My name is Sienna Barber, and at 29 years old, I had earned my stripes in the United States Navy as a major. In a world where titles and ranks dictate respect, I learned early that it wasn't given. It was earned, often the hard way. But there was one place where respect seemed impossible to win: my own family. On the most significant day of my life, my wedding day, I found myself standing at the threshold of St. Michael's Chapel in Charleston. The chapel was an emblem of history, an American icon, yet the memories that echoed inside felt far less sacred. The ornate stained glass windows bathed the stone floor in a kaleidoscope of vibrant hues, but none of that beauty could chase away the dread that wrapped around my chest. I wasn't here in a wedding gown, but in my service dress whites, crisp and immaculate, a reflection of my duty, my life. As I stepped forward, the doors of the chapel creaked open, and a wave of whispers rose. I felt every pair of eyes on me, but one set in particular burned through me like a searing flame. My father's gaze, cold and calculating, never wavered from me. His disapproval was as palpable as the heavy air I breathed. "Look at her," I overheard my father mutter to my brother Daniel, loud enough for me to catch every venomous syllable. "It's like she's playing dress-up for Halloween. So disgraceful." His words were a blade, slicing into me more deeply than I could ever have imagined. Every sacrifice I had made in the military, every sleepless night spent in combat zones, every moment I had faced danger in the name of service, all of it vanished in a single contemptuous phrase. Daniel's smirk was all too familiar. It was the same one that had haunted my childhood, a signal of their perpetual disappointment in me. They didn't understand. They didn't see the strength it took to wear this uniform. Today, however, the tables were about to turn. It wasn't their show, it was mine. The stage had shifted, and they would watch as I made my own mark. The air in the chapel was thick with judgment, and my heart was pounding harder with each step I took toward the altar. I could feel the weight of every unspoken criticism from my father. He had never truly seen me for who I was: a major in the United States Navy, someone who had earned her place through sheer determination and grit. To him, my career was nothing more than a phase, passing fancy, a distraction from the life he had envisioned for me. I was well aware of the silent war my father had waged against me. Growing up, I had always been the odd one out. My brother Daniel was the golden child, smart, charismatic, and bound for success in the corporate world. Every achievement I had earned in the military, no matter how significant, was dismissed with a wave of the hand. To him, the real value of life lay in business deals, country clubs, and vacations in Europe. My world, however, revolved around missions, strategies, and leadership under pressure. And yet, I couldn't escape the need for his approval. No matter how far I had come, how much I had accomplished, a part of me still longed for him to look at me and finally see me as worthy. But today that yearning was fading. I was no longer fighting for their approval. Today I was fighting for me. As I reached the altar, I took Mark's hand, feeling the warmth of his touch, the steadiness in his gaze. In that moment, all the stinging words, the cutting remarks, the feeling of being invisible vanished. For the first time, I realized I had been preparing for this moment my entire life. I wasn't just marrying Mark. I was marrying the future I had created for myself. The chapel's serene beauty was a stark contrast to the chaos of my childhood memories. I was transported back to Christmas 3 years ago, when the wounds of family rejection had first truly bled. Our house in Greenwich, Connecticut, was a picture-perfect setting for a family gathering. Yet it was the emptiest place I knew. My father, always the king of the house, was at the head of the dinner table, showering my brother Daniel with praise. Daniel had just closed a multi-million-dollar deal, and the room buzzed with admiration for his achievements. Meanwhile, I had just returned from a 6-month deployment in the Persian Gulf, a mission that could have ended in disaster at any moment. But in the world of my father, my accomplishments were nothing compared to Daniel's financial success. My mother, her tears not of sorrow but of fear about what the neighbors might think, quietly supported his dominance. In that room, I was invisible. My life of service was nothing more than an embarrassing afterthought. When I finally gathered the courage to speak, to share the honor of the Navy Commendation Medal I had earned, my father's indifference was palpable. His brief acknowledgement of my achievement was nothing more than a dismissive pat on the head. He quickly turned back to Daniel, reveling in his son's stock market exploits, as if my entire existence was no more significant than a footnote. The dissonance between my world and my family's world became even clearer that night. I was trapped in a world that didn't understand me, nor did it want to. My mother's placating voice on the phone only deepened my sense of isolation. "Your father just wants you to be settled, Sienna," she said. "A good husband, a life close to home. This career of yours, it's just so foreign to him." Settled. The word hit me like a blow. To settle meant to give up who I was, to abandon everything I had fought for in the military. My mother's words only served to reinforce the cold reality I had known for years. I would never be enough for them. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, I was destined to always be the disappointment in their eyes. And so, that night, in the midst of a snowstorm that blanketed the world in white, I made a decision. I would never seek their approval again. I would build a life that couldn't be touched by their indifference or their judgment. The girl who had sought their validation was gone. In her place, a woman who would fight for herself, who would never let anyone make her feel small again, had been born. The day my parents dropped me off at the Naval Academy was one of the hardest of my life. There were no tears of love, no heartfelt goodbyes. My father's grip on my hand was cold, dismissive. "Don't embarrass us, Sienna," he had said, his voice harsh. My mother cried, not out of sorrow, but out of fear of what others might think. As I stood there, watching their car disappear, a loneliness like no other washed over me. The world I had left behind was slipping away, and in its place was a future that seemed as uncertain as the storm clouds overhead. But I had no choice. I was already committed, and there was no going back. The war had begun, and it was one I was determined to win. The first year at the academy was like nothing I had ever experienced. It was a year of brutal physical and mental trials designed to strip you of everything you thought you knew about yourself. Every day felt like an assault. But through it all, I held on to the memory of why I was there, to prove to myself that I was more than the girl they tried to define. One night, after a particularly grueling day, I received a call from my mother. She told me of Daniel's lavish vacation, the expensive hotels and the elite parties he would attend. Meanwhile, I was covered in mud and fatigue, pushing myself beyond human limits. My world and Daniel's were so vastly different it was like comparing two entirely different universes. And in that moment something inside me snapped. I would never fit into their world, and I no longer cared to try. I would fight my battles alone, but I would fight them with everything I had. It was a few weeks later when a simple letter arrived, its plain white envelope carrying more weight than anything my family had ever given me. Dave Miller, a fellow sailor I had met briefly during training, had written me a letter of encouragement. His words were simple, but they were the first words of validation I had received from anyone who truly understood me. "See, plebe year is always the hardest. Don't let the bastards get you down. I saw you on the course this summer. You have what it takes to be a leader. Keep pushing." Those few words, written by someone who had been in the trenches, became my lifeline. They were the promise that I wasn't alone, and they gave me the strength to keep moving forward, no matter how much the weight of the world pressed down on me. The day of my wedding had arrived, and I stood in St. Michael's Chapel, a stark contrast to the girl I once was. My father's words still rang in my ears, but they no longer had the power to hurt me. As I walked down the aisle, my service dress whites gleaming in the sunlight, I felt the weight of all my achievements, my sacrifices, my journey. And then, as I stood before Mark, my fiancé, something incredible happened. A wave of sailors, in perfect unison, rose to their feet and saluted me. 1,000 pairs of eyes, respectful, proud, fixed on me. In that moment, my father's words crumbled into nothingness. My worth had never been defined by them. I had fought for my place, for my honor, and in that chapel, amidst the silent salutes, I finally realized that the only person's approval I needed was my own. After my wedding, I thought I could finally breathe, finally settle into the peace that had long eluded me. But peace was not part of my reality. I was a military officer, and my commitment to service was relentless, unforgiving. Though my wedding day had been a victory, my own triumph over my father's disdain, I knew that the real fight had only just begun. In the weeks that followed, I was called to duty. The Navy was my life, my calling, and my passion. Mark, my husband, understood this about me. He had always been supportive, but there were moments of tension, moments when the weight of my career pushed us apart. He loved me, but he didn't always understand the sacrifices I had to make. For years I had given everything to my country, to my job, and at times it felt like there was little room left for him. It wasn't easy to find balance, and I struggled with guilt. Guilt over not being able to be home more. Guilt over the late nights and early mornings. But in my heart, I knew my duty came first. It was the price I had paid to get where I was. It was the price I would continue to pay. One late night, after receiving an urgent call about a new mission, I left for the base, my uniform pressed, my mind focused on the task ahead. As I walked out of the house, Mark stood in the doorway, his eyes filled with concern. "I don't know how to do this, Sienna," he said softly, the vulnerability in his voice cutting through the steel I had built around my emotions. "You're always gone. And I'm just here." I paused, my hand on the doorframe, torn between my love for him and my commitment to my duty. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my throat tight. "I never wanted it to be this way. But I have to do this." Mark said nothing, just stood there watching me leave. I knew his silence spoke volumes. I had chosen this life, and sometimes that meant choosing it over everything else. I would return, of course. I always did. But there was something different this time. A sense of growing distance. A reminder that I couldn't be everything to everyone. The world I had chosen, one of duty and sacrifice, came with its own costs. And the people who loved me would always feel the burden of that. The months that followed my wedding were a blur of deployments, missions, and fleeting moments with Mark. But as much as my life had become about service, there was still one thing I hadn't been able to escape: my father's judgment. It had followed me across the world, across oceans, and across continents. His words, "disgraceful Halloween," echoed in my mind, never truly leaving me. I had thought the wedding day had marked the final confrontation, but I was wrong. It wasn't until a promotion ceremony months later that the true battle would unfold. The Navy had chosen to promote me to Lieutenant Colonel, a milestone I had worked toward for years. The ceremony was to take place in Washington, D.C., and I knew it would be another moment where my father's judgment would hover over me like a dark cloud. He had never attended my promotions before. Too busy, too important, too uninterested in the world I had built for myself. But this time he was coming. As the day of the ceremony approached, the dread settled in my chest once again. My father's disdain was a weight I could never truly escape. But something had changed inside me since that wedding day. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid of his judgment. I wasn't afraid of his disapproval. If he couldn't see my worth, that was his problem, not mine. The ceremony was held in a grand hall, filled with my colleagues and peers. The air was charged with excitement, with the pride of those who had made it to this milestone. As I stood at the front of the room, awaiting my turn, I caught a glimpse of my father in the crowd. His eyes were fixed on me as always, but now they seemed different. There was no smirk, no sneer, just a cold, silent stare. When my name was called, I walked forward with steady steps, my uniform sharp, my shoulders square. As the Admiral pinned the new rank on my chest, the room erupted into applause. The sound filled the hall, a tidal wave of recognition that drowned out everything else. But I knew, even through the applause, that my father was still watching, still judging. I glanced at him then, and for the first time, I saw something shift in his expression. It was subtle, but it was there, a flicker of something close to recognition. His lips parted as if to say something, but he remained silent. It was as if, in that moment, he understood the sacrifice, the years of dedication I had given to get here. Or perhaps he didn't. Perhaps it didn't matter anymore. But it didn't matter to me either. Because I had earned this moment. I had fought for it. And I no longer needed his approval to feel validated. It wasn't until several years later that I truly understood what that promotion ceremony had meant. Not just as a career milestone but as a turning point in my personal life. I had fought so hard to prove myself, to my father, to my family, to the world. But in the end, the only person I needed to prove anything to was myself. As the years passed, Mark and I found a way to balance our lives. We were a team now, partners in every sense of the word. He understood my commitment to the Navy, and though there were still moments of tension, we made it work. I had learned that I could be both a soldier and a wife, a leader and a partner. It wasn't easy, but it was possible. And as for my father, our relationship had changed. He still didn't fully understand my world, but he had come to respect it. The moment I had feared, the moment where he would finally acknowledge me for who I was, never came. Instead, he began to let go of his expectations. He no longer judged my career, my choices, or my life. In some ways, that was the victory I had been searching for all along. There would always be a part of me that wanted his approval. But there was a stronger part of me now, one that knew it was enough to approve of myself. It had taken a lifetime of struggle, of fighting against the tide of family expectations and societal norms, but I had won. I had become the woman I was always meant to be, not defined by my father's words, but by my own strength. And that, I realized, was the ultimate victory.